Everybody get up, no need to cram now. We got a real jam going down, going down, going down, going down, going down, going down. Welcome to the IntelliJAMS.
Right, continuing our trend of bringing more gems from IntelliJAMS onto the jam. Today I've got Jerry, who is the GM of advisory services for us here at IntelliJAMS, but more recently has moved into helping the product side as the lead of our analytics product. Jerry, hoping to jam a little bit about analytics and maybe like the science side of the science and art of testing. So thanks for coming to jam with me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to chat.
All right, speaking of like the art and science of this, so you have joined onto the product side to help with the analytics product inside of IntelliJAMS. So I think like when people think about IntelliJAMS, they're probably thinking like, oh, you guys have like pretty strong analytics. Like I set up my experiment, I'm able to see what we kind of infamously call the blue bars in terms of like understanding how an experiment is going. So as you think about the analytics product, like, is it that? Is it something else? Like where is IntelliJAMS going as like an analytics product?
Yeah, so happy to chat about that. So the way that I've seen IntelliJAMS as an analytics product today is, I think, what most people are familiar with, which is what I call kind of experiment analytics, right? You're running a test, and then you get to the results page, you see the blue bars, and there's a lot of ways that you can kind of slice and dice your data based off of the outcomes of your experiments and your test group. So that's one component of analytics. But I think as we are becoming a profit growth platform, we want to actually provide a much more holistic view of analytics that kind of tackles, I don't know if you guys have mentioned it in the past, but kind of all dimensions from kind of exploration, experiment, and experience. And so right now, analytics is focused on kind of experiment analytics, but there's an opportunity in kind of the explore phase to basically say, well, where do I test? How should I test? What can I discover to figure out how to design the best test to ensure that I am likely to have kind of the best outcome, right? That's kind of in the explore side. And then the other side is kind of more on the in the experience side is, hey, how do I actually track the impact of my tests after I've rolled out the results? How do I continue to monitor the performance of my site and actually look at things from a profit and profit per visitor lens, even when I'm not necessarily actively running a test, but trying to kind of monitor the results and business performance over time.
I think that was a really great way of explaining this. So we basically, from like an analytics perspective, we have like the discover analytics. What am I going to look at to inform a hypothesis on like what I want to test, what I want to experiment with, where do the opportunities exist, where are maybe some areas of improvement. We have the experiment itself, where I'm going to actually instrument the test and I'm going to analyze what happened inside of the experiment to disprove or prove my hypothesis. And then on the flip side of this is, hey, I have these different winners that I have rolled out to my entire site or to a segment or to a channel. How is that going? So we kind of have like discover, experiment, and then like monitor in terms of like this analytics product that you're thinking about.
That's exactly right. And I mean, I'm happy to talk about kind of how like we got to this type of thinking, because I think it stems a little bit into the trend, the kind of shift in kind of focus in my personal role here at IntelliJAMS as well.
Yeah, let's do that. Like maybe let's go through like the three areas of like of what we just talked about, and like how are you thinking about like some of these sections from like an analytics standpoint? So maybe we'll save experiment till the end, because anyone listening probably knows like, oh yeah, I've seen the blue bars, like I know what I can do, but there's probably some like pro tips that people don't necessarily know in like the data cuts there we can get into. But let's maybe start with discover. So like one thing, I love the word discover, by the way, because whenever I'm talking to brands, it's like there is a lot of best practices out there on the internet. And I think a lot of people get caught up in like testing to a best practice, or like someone said this on social, I should go do it. But I love the discover aspect of this because like everyone's business is unique. Your product catalog is unique. Your competitive landscape is unique. You need to look at the realities of your business and like build hypotheses grounded in the data realities of your business. So like, how are you thinking about kind of like cutting up what you can see about what's going on to help inform what should I test?
Yeah. So I think I can just jump into maybe price testing as an example, right? Every brand is a little bit different, as you mentioned. Every brand has a different selection of products. They could have a really wide assortment or a fairly narrow assortment. The distribution of their sales could be, also spread out fairly wide across maybe a couple of segments, but lots of products within a segment, or a lot of your demand really could be just focused on a single product. So kind of knowing that distribution is really important to decide where to test, because you want to test where you're going to create impact to the overall business, and you want to test where, effectively where there's the most impact, and whether that's one product or across a whole segment. So one, I think you need to know the knowledge of like where that is and where to focus. And then you also want to understand your customer base too, and basically say, hey, do I have a lot of customers who immediately purchase, or is there actually a fairly long consideration cycle to purchase? Does it take actually a couple of weeks for a customer to really decide on a product? And those two really those two pieces of information help to hone in on, well, where do I test? How long should I structure my test to make sure that I'm getting really, really meaningful results? And that's stuff that we actually want to kind of bake into the product and say, well, we could give you a bunch of guidance and some rules, but why don't we actually just kind of tell you our opinion within the product from your historical data itself? And I think that's one of the directions that we're thinking of going.
I love that. You basically like, hey, there's product information, there's customer information that's unique to your business. Like, how do you go about using that? And I know you've been kind of like exploring a lot, if maybe pun intended, exploring on the explore side of this quite a bit. Is there any kind of like data cuts of you? Because I'm assuming you're trying to put yourself in like the brand user's shoes here and say like, okay, what would I want to know to like inform that next test? So like, have you done like any data cuts where you're like, yo, this is super interesting. Like, this is definitely something that is going to be a game changer if we can expose this to kind of everyone early about their business?
Yeah. And so a lot of these kind of data cuts originated from kind of the advisory services side, where we were working with brands very specifically and saying, hey, brands came to us and said, hey, we want to run tests. We don't know where to start. Can you kind of help define the strategic vision? And we started, and most of the time we basically start and say, hey, well, let's get an understanding of your business. Let's get an understanding of the context that we're working in. So are you a very seasonal business or not? How dependent on promos are you or not? And then in terms of like where to test, as I mentioned, we basically take a look at where are the material aspects of your business, and that's where to focus your testing. The next piece for us is really looking at, well, let's take a look at order volumes. Let's look at order volumes by products and by segments. And that helps us understand, is there enough data for us to find meaningful results, right? We want to basically say, over the course of 2, 3, 4 weeks, if we can gather at least, 200, 300 orders per test group, we'll probably feel quite good about being able to achieve meaningful results. So as we think about even slicing data down to the individual product or product segment levels, we want to basically understand what are the limitations. And one of the fortunate things is, where you have less data, that's also going to be less material of an impact on your brand. And so as long as you're testing where the majority of the data is, you're also testing likely in the most meaningful parts of your site.
Yeah, I love that we're taking this from kind of like all the work that you were doing in a one-to-one basis with the brands we were working with on the advisory side and like trying to productize like, hey, here's where we would look. And I love that like basically what we're looking for is like, hey, how can we get specific without getting so specific that we just don't have enough like surface area to work with where it's not going to be meaningful? So like for every brand that might be a little different, like, hey, I can look deeper into like at the product level or at the customer level or at a specific segment. Like there's going to be places where I actually have enough volume happening in there where like I can structure a meaningful experiment or like go do something there and actually have it be, I mean, meaningful, but also like quick enough to actually do something there where I don't put an experiment together that I'm sitting waiting for, I don't know, months to actually like see if anything's happening.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, one of the things that I'm excited about as well as we're kind of exploring is figuring out, well, we want to take all of these things that we're doing on a one-to-one session. How can we actually scale that, right? And so I think Adam came on to talk about AI, but I think one of the ways that we're thinking of weaving this in too is taking some of the manual work out of the creation of kind of useful views as well. So one potential area of opportunity is like segmentation and tagging, right? And so a big way is like, well, we have things at the product level, but grouping the products is quite important. Segmentation is actually something that we think LLMs are actually quite good at doing reasonably well. And so auto-generating different types of cuts in which we think customers should be able to refine and choose, but giving people a starting point is also something that is a I think a great opportunity for the use of that we're exploring in terms of trying to weave in as well.
I love all that. I mean, like if we can take all the knowledge that you've been giving on like a one-to-one basis and try to make that just generally available to everyone, like that's going to be a massive win for us. So we're talking about the discover side here. Let's skip the experiment. Let's jump to the other side of the experiment. So to set the stage here, I ran an experiment. I like what was happening on my returning customer segment. So like I roll out an experience for returning customers as an example. So like when you're thinking about I've ran something, I've launched it, now I just want to kind of like monitor it ongoing. Like what does that potentially look like from like an analytics product standpoint?
Yeah, so one thing is, making sure that we have the time series data that basically shows, hey, here's your business performance and here's your business performance over time. And if we can weave in, specific known time periods of, hey, you finished a test during this, or we knew you ran a test during this period, so you can actually see what was the kind of impact that on your brand on a all-up basis of kind of testing. Because while you're testing, there's going to be a group that does well and less well, and maybe you'll see something that kind of splits the difference between your groups. And then the moment that you roll out to a winning group, we should basically be able to see a spike in the metrics as it converges toward the impact of the winning group. And so one of the things that kind of is that is something we'd like to basically have is allowing customers to be able to see that quickly, to say, hey, I rolled out this change and I did see the impact of the change in practice on all of my traffic, right? And then the other piece I think that would be exciting that we're really thinking about is, okay, how do we also look at longer term impacts, right? So for brands that have a lot of repeat purchases, if we put groups through a test, one of the things that we can also potentially do is also basically say, hey, let's look at the impact of different cohorts, right? Someone who bought previously at a lower in a lower price test group, did that change their behavior in their propensity to actually come back to site? And so that's another piece that we're thinking about, and also thinking through and saying, hey, how do we actually weave in kind of longer term aspects, right? Same thing, when you made a price change, after you've made that price change, do we actually see changes in some of these other kind of knock-on metrics that we might not have measured within the isolation of the experiment window itself?
I really like that. It's been something it's been on my mind a bit, where it's like the knock on like repeat purchase rate or LTV or like some of these retention style metrics, where I would have to let my test run for a very long time to actually try to like capture returning customers. Well, I guess it depends on like what your repeat purchase cycle is. If I'm selling, I don't know, hair scrunchies, maybe that's every week, but I don't think that is the reality for most people. But just being able to like analyze what's going on after the test concludes and being able to be like, hey, I rolled this out, and like, is this still a good outcome for me, like as I continue down this path? Because there are so many brands that use IntelliGems where it's like they really succeed because they feel like standing still is not good, where it's like, I test something, I roll it out, I continue to monitor it, and like in 3 months I want to like put that winning outcome up against like something else to just see like, is it still the winning outcome, or like, hey, can I actually change behavior on that? So I think being able to track this past the test and just kind of like into perpetuity as I roll things out is going to give people, again, like at the beginning we said there's these discover metrics or these discover analytics to help you inform a hypothesis, but I think this can actually inform an experiment as well as you kind of like track it down the road.
Yeah, I think it's a continuous like positive feedback cycle there, right? So basically you roll out a change, you see the impact, you see that impact sustain. It's possible you might see that deteriorate over some period of time because perhaps your customer base has changed, right? You've significantly ramped up your marketing, you're bringing in a bunch of new customers, a lot of your metrics will have changed. And then that might tee up this the notion of, hey, I tested this was successful back then. Maybe I should just retest to make sure, does this still continue to resonate with my customers in the same way? And the answer could be, no, it doesn't. Or it could be, yes, it does. And actually the deterioration in your metrics is actually caused by something else. And that's actually useful information to continue to kind of unpack, right? Likewise, maybe you see an upward shift in metrics, right? And then a part of the testing is done to find opportunities. A lot of it is also to help you understand your brand better and understand your customer base, right? There's kind of there's finding winners, but there's also a big learning element as well.
1,000%. Like win, lose, or draw, you can learn something and inform the next something. There's always something to learn to apply to the next experiment, the next potential opportunity. So I love that. Okay. I'm going to ask, we're going to go into the experiment side. So like what we already have. I'm going to ask you one question on this as someone who works kind of one-to-one with brands using IntelliGems for various things. What's kind of like your, maybe for people who are listening, inside of that experiment analytics, what do you think is like an underutilized part of that? Because like I feel like a lot of people are like, they look at the bars, they look at the blue bars, which is like just the top section of all of the analytics you have on that page. Is there anything in there that you think is like super useful to anyone listening where they should go dig into that and go kind of beyond the bars?
Yeah, I think there's two areas, right? So actually there's like so many areas. Where do I start? I think to start just on the first page, right? I think the thing that especially when it comes to kind of price tests, I always tell people you should look at both views, right? What is the impact on, typically the default when you test on products or product segments is your target product views, right? So let's say you raised prices on jeans, and then you'll say, hey, here's the impact. Did you sell more jeans? Was that more profitable? But what is super interesting is then when you flip to the all orders view, you then see the impact within the context of your entire brand. And oftentimes you'll extract quite meaningful insights on what was the knock-on effect or the halo effect on the rest of your on the rest of your products. We've seen things go actually either way, where you actually raise prices, people are super not insensitive to the to prices, so you were able to raise prices successfully on that product. And then on the flip side, we've seen both happen, which is actually people bought more of your other products because not only were people insensitive to the price of that core product, it also made everything else look relatively cheaper. And so people are like, hey, I'm actually willing to kind of spend on this other stuff because I'm already spending this much on this. These other products are relatively cheaper. And so that's kind of a positive halo effect. And sometimes you actually pick up on, sometimes you might actually have, a cannibalization of add-ons of like, this was more expensive. I might have been insensitive, but I feel like I don't have as much to spend on other things. So the impact wasn't felt on the product that you tested immediately, but on the additional basket of kind of add-on products. So important to look at.
1000%. There's another episode that I'll link in the comments where Adam and I were talking about like the substitute effects and like, hey, if I raise the price of one product, does everything else now look more appealing? And like, hey, I'm actually like dropping in sales of said thing, but I'm making it up in the sale of all the other things on my site that now look better in comparison, or the other way around. So I'll link that episode. Jerry, I'll give you one. You said there's a bunch of them. I'll give you one more in the experiment section, like one more place where you think, hey, anyone listening to this, when you're diving into like the existing analytics in IntelliJAMS, like what's another way to kind of extract as much value out of the data there as possible?
Yeah, I think another view that I really enjoy using is basically as you're monitoring the results of your test, you basically have that kind of time series of conversion and profit over time. And so there's a cumulative view of that, which you can kind of see whether things are converging or changing. But also the non-cumulative view also shows quite a lot. So when you kind of uncheck that cumulative view to non-cumulative, you can actually see the level of variation that is happening over time. And you basically see the raw performance by day. And there's a lot of insights that you can glean from there, because you might actually start to pick up trends earlier that you might not necessarily see in the cumulative that you might not see in the cumulative view. And oftentimes this is a sign of, hey, you should use this to evaluate whether to keep a test running longer or if it's too early to end a test, because you may often find that results may kind of shift over time, especially. Often, I've actually seen this in a few instances at the 1 or 2 week mark, where actually you see an initial change in conversion, but actually relative to control, but you actually see behavior either converge or flip over time, because you're actually measuring a longer window in which customers have a whole longer period to actually make a consideration around their purchase behavior.
It's interesting that you brought that one up, because earlier in the week, I was actually talking to one of our agency partners, and he was saying that is the most underrated feature of IntelliJAMS is when you like come off the cumulative there. Because what he was talking about is he's like, hey, you need to get this like statistical significance, and you want to be like, quote, certain, but you also want to be able to get to the next experiment and kind of like conclude this one. So his whole thing was that was a great tool to help him decide like, when he was confident but not certain. It's like, I'm confident that this is going in the direction I want it to. I'm able to end this early, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. And that's valuable to get to what that next experiment is going to be. That's
right. Because if you're basically seeing, fairly consistent behavior and a consistent delta day after day, and that's, even if you're not at the absolute height of statistical rigor, I think there's enough in data contained there to help you basically make a decision to say, hey, I generally feel that this is better than the control. I might not have enough to be like, okay, it's like this exact magnitude is like it's this much, but it'll definitely give you kind of the confidence to basically help make that call if you want to make the call earlier.
Love that. Jerry, this has been a fantastic jam. I'm sure this is not going to be the last one. We'll get you back on here again to have another one. But thanks for giving us those pro tips on like the existing analytics tool and helping us kind of see the future of where this is all going.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.